Good evening. Today is Thursday, March 27, 2026. I'm Geometric Malaza, and this is Cool News Primetime. Our actual broadcast is on online radio box, V Radio app, 89.5 Manila SDR, Cool TV on Delsat Channel 11, and the official YouTube and Twitch channels of Cool TV and Cool News. President Bongbong Marcos assures that the Philippines crude oil supply may last until June 30. He noted that there is a difference in pricing between crude oil imports and refined fuel imports. Despite alarming limits of the country's crude oil resources, the president assured that the government would continue to explore new sources of oil. To recall, the president has signed Executive Order number 110 last Tuesday, putting the country in a state of national energy emergency, which orders government agencies to take measures to stabilize the country's fuel supply. The Philippines has also received 700,000 tons of Russian oil barrels as of Monday and is eyeing joint oil explorations with China in the West Philippine Sea. Davao del Norte Governor Edwin Huabib has stated that the province is in negotiation with the representative of the King of neighboring Malaysia to import 44 million liters of diesel. Huabib said that the negotiations are ongoing while preparing for the storage and funds for purchasing diesel. The governor added that they would inform the Department of Energy and is coordinating with the Provincial Treasurer's Office and the Development Bank of the Philippines to prepare the payment. The plan aims to prevent disruptions in government services and businesses, providing sustainability to the economy. He also ensured that the diesel would be sold at lower prices compared to the current market rates. The Department of Transportation has announced additional routes covered by free rides as of this Friday, which includes Philcoa to Cubao, Welcome Rotonda to Cubao, Lawton to Welcome Rotonda, Lawton to Parañaque Integrated Terminals Exchange, Nagtahan to Cubao, Commonwealth to Fairview, Fairview to Cubao, Quiapo, SM Masinag to Quiapo, Baclaran to Monumento via TAF, Makati through 1 Ayala to Muntinlupa through Star Mall, and Heritage to Market. The Manila Local Government Unit has also announced that they have negotiated with 22 jeepney operators and drivers associations to deploy more than 1,400 jeepney units, whilst having their operating costs and daily wages covered by the Manila LGU. The Libreng Sakay program will start from March 30 to 31 and will resume from April 6 to 8. Vice President Sara Duterte's camp dismisses alleged bagman Ramil Madriaga's claim
We are apologizing for the technical difficulties happening right now on
Hello.
Dio's end.
Apologies for the technical blunder. Vice President Sara Duterte's camp dismisses alleged bagman Ramil Madriaga's claim on TV's threat against his life. Attorney Salvador Panelo, the Vice President's legal counsel for the perjury complaint filed against Madriaga, has dismissed the claim as comical and an obvious falsehood. Panelo expressed his dismay on another claim that the VP visited Madriaga in jail, persuading not to testify, claiming that it was Teves that the VP visited as per confirmation by the Interior and Local Government Secretary John Vic Remulla. and Neves were jailed in Camp Bagong Diwa in Taguig. Neves was jailed over allegations of being the mastermind behind the murder of former Negros Oriental Governor Roel Digamo, whilst Madriaga was jailed over kidnap for ransom charges. The Philippines and France have signed an agreement allowing participation in joint exercises in each other's territories. New agreement would allow for a greater cooperation with the French ground forces, which took place in the annual U.S.-Philippine Balikatan joint military exercises. France became the first country in Europe that has reached a defense pact with the Philippines under the status of the Visiting Forces Agreement of SOFA. The Philippines has secured similar treaties with Japan, Canada, and New Zealand, seeking to counter Chinese assertion over the disputed West Philippine Sea. Manila and Beijing have been involved in frequent clashes in the West Philippine Sea, in which Beijing has claimed almost the entirety of the region with its 9-dash line, despite the 2016 ruling of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea in favor of the Philippines. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has stated the summit for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, which will take place in Cebu province, will push through. The summit will focus on addressing the association's plans to respond on the effects on the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, which includes oil supply, food supply, and its prices, as well as the welfare of migrant workers in the Middle East region. Cebu is set to host the summit from May 7 to 8 after hosting both the ASEAN tourism and foreign ministers in January for their respective meetings. PBBM said that the ASEAN is yet to discuss if the second ASEAN summit taking place in Manila would push through, where the leaders of ASEAN and its diplomatic partners, including Japan, the United States, Australia, China, and India, and others, would meet. The Philippines was scheduled to host over 600 meetings from working groups to local meetings throughout 2026, including the ongoing negotiations for the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea between China and ASEAN, which will take place separately. And now for tomorrow's weather forecast. Easterlies is still the dominant weather system in the country, according to Pagasa. Metro Manila and the rest of the country would experience partly cloudy to cloudy skies with isolated rain showers or thunderstorms. Possible flash floods or landslides may occur during these severe thunderstorms. Today's hottest temperature was recorded at 2 p.m. at 32.5 degrees Celsius, whilst the coolest was at 5 a.m. at 22.6 degrees Celsius. Up next, U.S. President Donald Trump extends its pause on strikes against Iranian energy infrastructure till April. Don't go away! Our actual broadcast will continue after this.
Hi guys! Init ng panahon. Mapapagod pa pagkatapos maglaro ng basketball. Iniisip niya ano-anong dapat na inumin ito. Eto na lang, uminom ng Sinsis Lime, ang soda drink na may lasa ng lime para ma-refresh ang iyong lalamunan at ang iyong katawan. Fresh, diba? Sinsis Lime, nakaka-fresh talaga to.
Introducing InnovaStar 14. Ultra HD display for lifelike viewing, 48 megapixel triple lens camera for lifelike photos, and high performance Snapdragon 8 Gen 5 processor for high demand gaming. Personalize however you want. InnovaStar 14 for gaming, for pictures, for anything.
Shopee sebelas big sale, ada big sale di Shopee sebelas Shopee sebelas big sale, ada big sale di Shopee sebelas sebelas. Ada big sale di Shopee, Shopee 11. Ada big sale di Shopee, Shopee 11. Ada big sale di Shopee, Shopee 11.
Have you ever tried delicious French toast and freshly baked bread? If not, don't worry. You can find them here at Charms Pastry and Bakery. Made with high-quality wheat flour, fresh eggs, and rich maple syrup, every bite is made to satisfy everyone's cravings. And the best part? You can enjoy all of these wherever you are at a very affordable price. So, come and visit us today at Charms Pastry and Bakery, where every bite is simply lovely.
Mula sa ginadgad na coconut, gumawa ng masarap na crackers na may lasa ng coconut. Mag-Kamyon Coconut Crackers. Pwede itong kainin kahit saan at kailanman. Kamyon Coconut Crackers. Feel the sweetness of coconut.
Antukin pa rin ako tuwing umaga. Napakahirap talagang gumising at yun, late ako parati sa programa. Kapag maganda ang gising ko, sisigla pa rin ako sa tulong ng Tengu Coffee Drink. Ito ay may tapang-tapang ng kape na may asukal at river. 3-in-1 sa tapang at sarap. Ang tapang, ang sarap. Try nyo. Basta may Tengu, gigising ka. PDM. Kamusta si P dito? Kung kailan napagod ako sa trabaho, kakabasa ng script o sa prompter man, at kahit ako'y pagod pa rin, sisigla pa rin ako sa tulong ng Miralles Cola. Miralles Cola lamang ang may iron, taurine at B vitamins. Ayos to ah. Para masigla ang araw nyo, mag-Miralles Cola na.
PDM.
Iron, taurine, and B vitamins is the key for PD Cola.
PD Cola.
25 pesos lang, saan ka ba?
You're watching our actual broadcast. U.S. President Donald Trump has said Thursday that he will extend his pause on U.S. military strikes against Iranian energy infrastructure by 10 days. The pause will extend until April 6, 10 p.m. time in Washington, D.C. The extension, according to Trump, was done upon the request of the Islamic Republic. The conflict has spread across the Middle East after the Iranian strikes against several U.S. bases hosted in many Gulf countries as a response. But Iran has said that it is not engaged in talks with Washington. Trump has not given any details on whom the U.S. is negotiating with in Iran, with many high-ranking officials killed in the war. Two senior officials of the Trump administration, speaking on the condition of anonymity, have claimed that the Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, or SMIC, China's largest company responsible for producing semiconductors, has supplied chip-making tools to Iran. The SMIC, which was heavily sanctioned by the U.S. government with the Chinese military, has reportedly begun sending the tools over a year ago, with no reported signs of stopping, according to the senior officials. China has not publicly taken a side in the Middle East conflict, as China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called this week in both parties to pursue peace talks as soon as possible. It was not clear if any of these chip-making tools have played in Iran's response in the conflict. The European powers has accused Russia of playing a role in the Iranian strikes against U.S. bases in the Middle East, and will eye on raising the issue to U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Rubio will join the second day of the gathering of ministers of leading Western democracies, which would take place amid conflicts in Iran and Ukraine, as well as economic instability and mounting unease over foreign policies under U.S. President Donald Trump. European Union Foreign Chief Kaya Kallas claimed in her interview that with reporters that Russia is helping Iran with its intelligence to target and kill Americans. She added that Russia is now supporting Iran with drones so they can attack U.S. military bases and neighboring countries. Child rights activist Sally Juano has been released after the Court of Appeals acquitted her for rebellion charges. According to the court, the evidence against Ulano fails to establish with the required moral certainty that she and co-workers Dioncio Almonte were among the participants in an alleged rebellion. Uano was released from the Correctional Institute for Women in Mandaluyong on March 26. The appellate court's acquittal has reversed the ruling of Taguig Regional Trial Court Branch 266, which reversed changes against her against her over cases of rebellion. A Dutch court has ordered Elon Musk XAI's Grok to stop generating and distributing sexualized images of people without their consent in the Netherlands. The Amsterdam District Court has ruled that XAI's Grok, artificial intelligence tool, and the platform X, formerly Twitter, which hosts the AI tool, are barred from generating and or distribute sexual imagery which features people with less to no clothing without explicit permission. Off Limits, a Dutch organization monitoring online violence, has took legal action in cooperation with the non-profit Victim Support Fund over Grok's ability to generate realistic sexualized deepfakes images of women and children using real photos. The XAI legal team has argued that it is impossible to guarantee the preventability of the abuses in the platform, adding that the company already took measures in January to prevent Grok from generating or editing real images or real people with revealing clothing. The court has stated that there was reasonable doubt over XAI's argument, citing that Off Limits managed to generate a sexually explicit video using Grok shortly before the meeting. And for tonight's Geo News, let's take a trip down memory lane. For almost 3 years, we have been on the air as you hear us right now. I'm not the first employee of this station, however, considering my good friend Mig Sander Alex has been there since the very beginning. You could argue that he started this station with whatever technical magic he did all these years ago with his online presence at Sino.fm. Back in the day, we started with a single show, interestingly named My Sex. Named after MSA himself. The format of the show was reading explicit requests from our audience. It was fun while it lasted. Currently, he assumed the late night slot with My Sasabihin Ako. He moved on from his rather unique past, by producing milk? I don't even know anymore. As for me, I have been with this station for so long, I still remember the times that we had 2 DJs on board that time. Myself, of course, and our dear colleague, Mamon. We both serve a purpose that time. Today, I serve as the general manager of our sister station, DZEX 1026, and Mamon has moved on with life when he got a job. Ew! Can't relate with that. Nah, no job. As the years went, many of our iconic DJs came with my blessing. I brought Sen to do a show that would become Talk with Sen. I brought TCB to the station to initially start a tech tip show that eventually became the Ambatukam show, the Dreamy Show. We then brought MSA back from his long hiatus and helped him and his show return to the airwaves. Then Hoshi came next. And of course, Blue came to the station, who became my co-host at the appropriately named The Geo and Blue Show. I even gave my news director position to Mido. And oh baby, sweet baby Jesus, look what he did to our news operations. Our team is still strong, and whilst we have our own problems even before, we still remain committed to keep the station strong and well. And well, look at where we are now. The radio group of TGON, led by our amazing boss, our amazing field boss, CEO, Mami Ayu, Doc Grayson, Daddy Rex, whatever you call him, has expanded around 5 to 6 members. To think that we started because Nick Sander was doing drugs. Wait lang. Hindi ako makapag-continue nito so ang music. Oh my God, wait lang. To think that we started this station because, MSA Mig Sander Paa was doing drugs and built Cool FM from the ground makes me proud of what we achieved. But some things almost led to another. I contemplated for some time that I should retire. But, CEO here at Cool, Athena, or as you know him, Mr. Eli Dimalupi, gave every reason to keep going, He's been my mentor for so long, and I thank him for that. Our station is approaching 3 years old at the end of the month, and our team has expanded ever since then. I mean, after all, can't you believe si Kuya Pau, si Kuya Adrian, si LTG, si Mito, si Kuya Lloyd, si Kuya Roms, everyone here and so many more are doing work for our station. I want everyone listening and want to know the beginning of the station so we could look back at how far have come. And so that concludes this very long and sentimental Geo News. And that's all for headlines tonight. Stay tuned to Cool News and TGON Cool FM for the latest updates. I will be committing estafa and scam people out of their money. I'm Gio Melaza. Good evening. Coming up, Gigan sa Tikol, para sa Tikol. Good night, everyone.